Good evening, Fiji, and welcome to For the Record. Violence against women and children in our country continues to be an issue widely discussed and over the years has also seen a vast number of reported cases. Attitudes towards this issue has changed with the enormous amount of work put into awareness programs, but with the continuing number of reported cases received by the police, it's obvious there's still more work to be done. This evening, we're joined by the coordinator of the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, Ms. Shamima Ali. Good evening, Shamima.
Good evening.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I know you're really busy, especially at this period, but thank you again for taking the time to come. Now, Shamima, I'm going to ask, Fiji Women's Crisis Center started back in the early 80s, in fact, 1984. Now, were you involved in its inception, or did you join in a little bit later?
Unfortunately, I wasn't. In the beginning, I was out of the country, but I joined it as soon as I got back in May 1985 as a volunteer.
Now, I believe it was also formed by a group of concerned women, especially with Salvation Army and nurses.
Yes.
Were they were all volunteers?
They met for a year from 1983, and there were lawyers in there, the health workers, and just community workers, women community workers, the National Council of Women, the YWCA. So there's a whole lot of women who met for 1 year before the collective was formed and the doors were opened in August 1984.
So you joined in right after when you returned into the country. Is it something that you'd always thought you'd do?
No, I knew that I wanted to do something with women, and particularly being out of the country at a university with my former husband, which was very radical at Sussex University. There were lots of radical women's groups and so on. So I used to follow them around as a third world wife. So I was a teacher by profession, but I had to leave to look after my husband then. So I followed groups around, and I learned a lot, and I really wanted something like that to be in Fiji. And I started talking to some people, and particularly Reverend Nicole, and about this. And when the crisis center the idea of it was being mooted, people were sending me reports and in letters and so on at that time. And when I came back, Reverend Nicole took me straight away to a collective meeting, and I've never looked back since then. But also, I grew up in a violent home, and so I always felt very, a strong sense of injustice was being done to the women in my family, around me, and so on. So I started, rebelling against it all the time, and all my life I have rebelled against any kind of authority, and particularly male authority. So this was the best place I could find myself.
Well, okay. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Nawaka in Nandi, but all my Christmas holidays, from the time I can remember till I was about 16, was at Natolo Neirai Mai Vasu.
And you hold that you're pretty strong with the ties to Neirai.
Yes, very strong, very strong. Yeah.
All right. Well, now, at its inception, when you first joined the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, how did your family take it, or how did the people around you? Was there any comments that the attitudes that you had to face?
Well, they thought I was mad. There was something very wrong with me, and that it was not. I wasn't ever going to make any money, and
it was definitely unpopular at the time.
Yes, yeah. And why couldn't I just get back to my profession and earn some money for everybody and for myself? But people were a bit embarrassed. People who were close to me, because at that time, of course, people just didn't talk about women's rights and issues of violence against women, girls, and children, and so on. But gradually, people who were close to me started accepting that I couldn't be in any other place, knowing my background, where I grew up, and the kind of characteristics I had displayed.
What type of hardships did you have to find, especially having to get women to talk about this issue of violence? It hadn't been done so, in a coordinated approach before in Fiji at that time. What type of difficulties did you face?
Oh, plenty. But the women who were in the collective were very committed to the issue, and so they went in quite fearlessly, and including myself. And because we started seeing the way women and girls were suffering, and children started coming in as soon as we opened our doors. So, there was nothing else we were going to look at. there was a lot of flack. We were called man haters, lesbians, all kinds of names were given to us, home breakers. But we continued, and right from the very beginning, because we were very well organized, we planned for nearly 18 months before we opened our doors. So it was very well organized. We had done the groundwork, what was wrong where. So when we spoke, it came from an area, we had a lot of factual incidents. We had collected data by then. We also used as a foundation work done by the YWCA when it was very radical, the women who were involved at that time. And so they had done a preliminary report on rape in Fiji, and that also formed the foundation for the work on rape and sexual assault. So those things were done. So we had strategized very well. There was no money at all. And at that time, none of the donors, none of the development agencies saw violence as a development issue or as a human rights issue.
What about the government at that time?
Oh, no, nothing, not at all, in fact. No one talked about it, So we brought it all out into the open. The media was pretty good because, it was something new, so they, started giving us some space. I used to work in radio, so I created space there to get in feminist radical women. My first interviewee was the late Antiquini Bavandra, so I was talking to women who had really made it and were going to conferences and so on. So getting people used to it. So we used the media a lot to get the message out. But right from the beginning, the police came on board and said, can you come and talk to us about these issues? And also the Pacific Theological College.
Really?
The first ones are most, some of the fiercest opponents come from that area, the religious.
Yes.
But they were quite good at that time, so we started talking at that, then. And so gradually we built up the community awareness. We took the counseling as well as the community awareness together and went out into the community, which we continue to do. So gradually, even now there are a lot of detractors, but there is a whole lot of credibility we have built up. So those were the things. Funding was a big, big, big issue because we were volunteers. We paid the rent and everything ourselves, those of us who were in paid employment. So we took it in turns to pay for all the costs and things, and very dedicated volunteers, both expatriate women who had had experience in rape crisis centers and the local women, very ordinary women, community workers, and so on. So, we kept at it, and we persisted and persevered and criticized government, all the governments along the way. We do that all the time. We're like a watchdog, so government also, each successive government has accepted us and has listened to us.
At any time, has there been any support from government in terms of financial contribution towards the Fiji Women's Crisis Center?
In the early days, there was. There was from Social Welfare Department. They would fund for a receptionist or things like that. So right in the beginning, that was the monetary contribution they made. But gradually, as we started getting funding, so that sort of dried up, and different governments came in. They had different ideas about women's rights and so on, so they stopped that. But in terms of working together with governments, we have had a lot of engagement.
Okay. Well, we've run out of time on this segment, but stay with us right here on For the Record. We'll be right back with the coordinator of the Fiji Women's Crisis Center. You're back on For the Record, and with us this evening, Ms. Shamima Ali, a name synonymous with helping women who face violence in our country. Now, let's talk 16 days of activism against violence against women and children. Now, how did this, the whole 16 days start? The concept, where did it come from?
Well, I should be able to tell you I'm a founding member in 1991 at Rutgers University. And it was as a build-up to the 1993 World Human Rights Conference.
So you were still in uni?
No. I was at the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, but I was sponsored by Asia Foundation to attend this conference of women. Because we've done the pioneering work in the Pacific, in Fiji and the Pacific on violence against women. So I was nominated to go to Rutgers University. And by that time, we had also formed networks with the Asia-Pacific Women Law and Development Forum, so we were getting known internationally, particularly in the feminist circles and so on. So I was invited to be part of this group of women, about 23 women, from all the regions of the world, and I represented the Pacific. So we got together with very well-known feminists like Charlotte Bunch, Roxana Carrillo, and all these people, and started looking at violence against women a lot of things had been written as a human rights violation. So the cry was, women's rights are human rights. That's where it came from. And we decided to petition the UN to recognize violence against women as a human rights violation. So, that's our petition went around. And we also decided that there are certain days in the year, 25th of November, which is the International Day for the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls. It was actually the International Day of Protest. And the first time we marked it in Fiji was 1987. We had a march and so on. It was just a day. So 16 days, we decided we'll start on that day, and a whole lot of other days in between, World AIDS Days, so look at the AIDS and violence against women.
That's why there's 16 days?
Yes.
Because each day is dedicated.
Each day, different days. And the 6th of December, Montreal Massacre. So there were women from Canada where men took up the white ribbon campaign because of the 14 feminists. 14 engineering student females who were shot dead because the guy said they were feminists, they had no business, and in the engineering field. And then it culminates, and there are other days in between. Now they have on the 29th of December, Women Human Rights Defenders Day. 29th of December has now been included in the 16 days. And then on the 10th of December, it culminates then, which is World Human Rights Day. So those are the 16 days we decided that we'll do all kinds, we'll intensify the campaign on the elimination of violence against women. And that's how, and we took, and all of us who came from different regions of the world took it back to our regions. And in 1991, we marked the first 16 days of activism in Fiji. The petition went around, and also around the world in the Pacific. We had hundreds and thousands of petitions collected, collated, and sent off to Rutgers University once again. Then those went then to the UN conference in Vienna in 1993, where there was a tribunal and so on. And finally, the UN accepted and declared violence against women as a human rights violation.
Yes, I remember that from 1993. My mother actually took me to that conference.
Yes,
but
yes.
1991, when it was first done here in Fiji, what was the response like here?
The women's groups were all looking for something to do on those days, because people didn't know about those days. So the women came. We had a big thing we had a march, and and maybe 50, 60 women, Catholic Women's League, National Council of Women, YWCA, us, Fiji Women's Rights Movement, our sister organization, So, and even the Zanana Muslim League, they were there. So, group of women marched, and we had a big thing, and people came, listened. Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that those are church organizations and religious organizations. Mainly, these are also the stalwarts that always speak against what the work that you do. Yeah. How has that changed? How has that happened?
I'd like to clarify. It's the men in those organizations who speak against. The women know, because our lives are intertwined because of the discrimination, the inequalities we all share. So these women came out and joined us all, and we've continued those relationships.
How have the attitudes within these, with the men and those who hold positions of power within these organizations changed? Have you seen over the years?
Yes, in recent years we've seen a lot of changes, starting with the Anglican Church. The Catholic Church has been on and off, The Methodist Church, we've had engagements with the women's groups, but not as much as we're having over the last year or so. But the Anglican Church, I would say, has led the work, and they've got a men's program. They have got a guidance counseling center now, the House of Sarah. So, a huge change from the time we started about 29 years ago to how the faith-based organizations, particularly the Christian religious community, have taken on the issue. Still a long way to go. Yes. We're having problems with the new wave churches that are coming in, still very much patriarchal. I mean, they're all patriarchal, but we have made sort of inroads in some of them.
Now, there's with these charismatic churches, there's also a huge group of youth groups. Now, is there work being done also with this? Because we've noticed a lot of youths involving themselves with these charismatic churches because of the type of programs that they have. Is that also a way that awareness is being targeted for these youth?
Well, we're working with the mainline churches. We haven't, because the Crisis Center is of the view that we do not impose, we don't get in. We let people know we are here. When they are ready, that's the best time. They are ready, they invite, and we go in. So everybody knows we are around. I mean, looking at the amount of community workshops and awareness that we do throughout Fiji, only by request. You know, so we're waiting. Whenever these new groups are ready, we are willing to go in. But we are going to target young men, and hopefully we'll catch some of these young men.
All right. When we speak of young men, there's also a gender program that is targeting young men that the Fiji Women's Crisis Center started. Now, how are your male advocates program working?
It's both for young men and older men, but it's doing really good. It's recognized as a best practice model globally, not only regionally. And it's about men taking responsibility for their own violence and also for other men's violence. So that means changing themselves after undergoing training with us, and then change their own behavior, their own thinking, and then take that and influence other men in their community.
Realistically, how much of an impact do you think you've made with this advocacy program?
A lot, actually a lot. And I do it, you know, and people say that, oh, men will only listen to men. And I, myself and my network members, specific network members, the leaders in this work, we decided, no, this is where they start listening to us, you know. And I had my, my first one with the military of Fiji, you know. So when they invited us in to do 2 weeks training with officers and so on, and that was my baptism by fire. And once I had done that one, I said, I can do any group of men. So, you know, after the good men, what I call the good human being men, after 2 days, they're onto it. They realize what's happening and so on, and there's quite a lot of remorse and so on. The bad one, they will fall by the wayside. So, you know, in a group, we had expected 5 would come on board, and never mind, you know, 5 is good enough for us. But actually, it's the other way around. 20 come on board, the other 5 fall, you know, by the wayside. So it's quite a powerful program, the 1 week. And once they have passed through that, and they go back into their community, and they do this work, and we hear reports back, and people are very, very strict about how the male advocates behave once they say we are male advocates for this group and that group. And then if they've behaved and done good work, then they go into the second stage, where they really look at masculinities, and the masculinities expert we have identified with other women's groups help from overseas, and he takes them through that. The third stage, they have developed a manual, and now we're coming to the fourth stage, where these men will be brought together to train as to how to use that manual.
Okay. Well, we're still speaking with the coordinator of the Fiji Women's Crisis Center. We will be right back after this short break with more, and also on a report that will be launched later this week. Welcome back to For the Record. We are talking about the issue, violence against women and children. Now, there's been a report where that has been, that's been supported by the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, research on, a national research on women's health and life experiences in Fiji. When was this conducted?
This report by us in cooperation with the Fiji Bureau of Statistics and sponsored, of course, by OZE, our major donor, was conducted between 2010 and 2011. And it's taken us nearly 2 years to have the analysis ready and things like that, and write the whole report up. It's a 300-page report. And it's titled Somebody's Life, Everybody's Business. Somebody's Life, Everybody's Business. That's very catchy and very, very true. Yes.
Now, how many women altogether, roughly, how many were involved?
About 3,193.
All across the country?
All across the country, all the provinces we've been to. So, yeah, so quite extensive. We used of course, the Bureau of Stats samples, used their field workers, and also they assisted in data and processing and things like that. So it's all over, all groups, ethnicity, religion, and so on. Perhaps what we did miss out was perhaps the gay community and women and girls with disabilities, but that's something in the pipeline that we will need to do. Okay.
You mentioned the gay community. How important is it to include them in these studies?
Very important, very important, because, patriarchy also impacts on them. And we do know that there are high levels of violence between partners, but also high levels of sexual violence against them. So it's really important to have, but I just believe that we need to, first of all, do a real good separate survey, and get an idea, a greater idea of what is actually happening.
All right. I know that the launch is later this week on Monday. Now, can you just tell us just roughly the impact of this, what you found from the research?
Well, we did release the preliminary report earlier this year in February, and we have very high levels of violence, intimate partner violence, either de facto or married couples or boyfriend, girlfriend. So we're showing over 60%, and wherever this survey has been conducted using this model, the WHO model, we are ranking about fourth.
Fourth in the world?
Fourth in the world, yes. So I think in about 25, 26 countries. So, excuse me, and the only other Pacific country which is before us is Kiribati.
Now that's quite alarming, considering the amount of awareness that we have conducted here in Fiji compared to that of Kiribati. Now, is this, where do you think what is it that we're not doing? Or what is it that we're not listening to?
Well, if you look at global documentation that has been done, violence against women is so entrenched and so much part of people's lives and such an accepted part of women's lives. People accept it. Women themselves accept it. Even now, this survey shows the number of women who accept that you have to be obedient. If you're not, it's okay for your husband to beat you up. So that is very difficult to get rid of, that whole change. And it's intergenerational, and the changes are incremental. So we have to bide our time and wait for the change to come. I don't believe it's going to come in my lifetime, but the changes that are going to come and are already coming is the change in attitude of people who are in authority.
Okay. Now there's also various other, apart from the physical aspects of abuse, there's other types of abuse that occur within house, within a family. Now, is this also work how much more of an impact do you think the Women's Crisis Center needs, or more work that they need to do to really bring these figures to light? Because I feel that these are also issues that have yet not been brought out.
Look, Fiji is a vast country, particularly with the islands, and very difficult for transportation. Higher rates are found in those inaccessible places where people have little access to services and so on. So definitely we need to strategize. This survey actually indicates to us how our strategies for the next 10 years or so, where we're going to go, what are we doing, which is not quite having an impact, and how to improve on what we are already doing. So it's really good, and also good that that's what this survey is doing. So we need to do a lot more work. We need to do, but one of the things that is an impediment is, while there are many groups, including government agencies and government departments and ministries doing work on violence against women, a lot of times we're not on the same page, because the most effective strategies are those that are rights-based, which recognizes violence as a human rights violation. And that's where we are not at. A lot of things come in, people don't want to treat particularly violence in the home as a criminal offense, which it is. It's a crime being committed in our homes every day, and so on. So we need to be on the same page, and we should not be wary of each other. We should be working together on this. And we're trying to do that through some of the task forces that government has set up. But still a long way to go.
What can the everyday Fijian watching this program this evening do? As Fijians, we all know of family, of friends that live in various other parts of the country. And while they're watching this evening, what can they do?
Join the movement. Join our movement. Find out what you can do. You don't have to belong to an organization. You can do it in your own home. It starts from our own home. Men, start thinking about changing your behavior, because the impact of this is so great, and it's got far-reaching impacts socially, economically, and so on, developmentally. And women, speak out when this is happening to you, but also how we bring up our girls and boys. You can do that, treating them equally, giving them the same opportunities, the same resources, girls and boys and so on. These are the things we can do every day. Attend the workshops, learn more about it, and we have got branches all over Fiji, and and whatever information you want, call us and we'll give it to you.
All right. Now, there are also cases of women who were reluctant to the change, yes? How do you feel that the Women's Crisis Center can deal with this in the coming, the work that you'll need to do?
We have to be more proactive. We have to have more staff going out in the communities. There's a lot of calls from the community. We're going all over. In fact, we have to say to people, wait, not this week, next week. Fijian speaking, Hindi speaking, particularly Itoke speaking people, because communities. So we're going out. We have to do a lot more of that. But we also have to work a lot with women. But that is not going to bring, only doing that is not going to bring about the changes. If women become aware of their rights, women and girls, once they become aware, then what do they do? If the police, the law enforcement is not working well, what do? We tell them you can go to court, we have got the DV legislation, we have this, and they go. And everything falls flat because the official on the other end is not responding to them appropriately. So, for us, it's going to be all over. We're going to work with law enforcement. We've worked with them over the years, but a lot more, and being a lot more proactive, getting them on board, awareness training, and so on. So we need to do all that so everything goes well together. And women are coming out. They're wanting workshops, and so they're also supporting each other to come out. I'm sure the next time we talk here, there are going to be a lot more changes.
Thank you very much, Shamima. Now, very briefly, before we wrap up the show, what do you see for our future in the future for Fiji? What do you see Fiji in, say, in the next 5 years?
In terms of women?
In terms of women.
I have a lot of faith in the young women who are coming out. And I just think it's going to be a different Fiji in 5 years as far as women are concerned. I'm not saying it's a huge struggle, but I just see there's going to be changes because men are also coming on board. I have a lot of faith in the men of this country. And if these young people get together and we support and mentor, I think we're going to go see a lot of changes.
Thank you very much, Shamim, for being with us this evening. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you again for joining us. And for questions and comments, please email us on fortherecord@fbc.com.fj. Join us again next week for more discussion on pertinent issues to all Fijians. Good night, Fiji.